About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all. But I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the foo? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around very slowly and started dance-walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see.
So this happened to me a few years ago, but the memory will be etched into my memory until the day I die. This is the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me in my life. This happened a few years ago when I was a student, so just a bit of preface to set the scene. The university I went to was a fairly small campus out of town, with the main road from the town running past the edge of campus. When I was at university, I had a fairly nocturnal work pattern. I found it easier to study/work from the early evening into the small hours than sleep until lunchtime. At the time this happened, I was 19-20 years old, female. So on the night in question, I was studying and doing coursework with my friend in the library till around 1 a.m. My friend lived in the main accommodation blocks on one side of campus, while I was staying in a fairly secluded accommodation block on the other side of campus. To get from the library to my flat, I would have to walk for around 10 minutes through a badly lit wooded area. For some reason, in my infinite wisdom, I decided it would be safer to walk with my friend back to the main residence blocks so I could then walk along the well-lit main road that runs past the campus to the area where my residence was. Basically, the library was the midpoint between our two residences, with the main road past the campus as the base of the triangle. I didn't factor in that at that time of morning even the main road would be deserted. I was walking along the main road minding my own business, but after a few minutes I became aware of the noise of a car idling very close to me. I took a few covert glances behind me and saw there was a car driving along really slowly about 5 meters behind me. I didn't get a look at who was driving. The road was absolutely deserted, so there was absolutely no chance it could have been a coincidence. And as the road was out of town, it was a national speed limit, so it wasn't normal for cars to drive so slowly on that stretch. At this point, I was starting to get freaked out, but the naive part of me hoped if I just kept walking they would go away. So I kept walking, while staying aware of what the car was doing while I started to weigh up my options. A few moments later, the car accelerated sharply past me to my great relief. The relief instantly turned to horror when the car then pulled to a sudden stop about 20 meters in front of me. My blood ran cold, and I'll never forget that feeling of raw, primal fear that surged through my body in that moment. The only way I can describe it is that every single cell in my body was screaming at me that I was in very real and immediate danger. I got that gut feeling that other people talk about. I just knew that if I kept walking past the car, something terrible would happen. I stopped dead and spent a few minutes rooted to the spot, realizing I didn't have a lot of options at this point. To my immediate left was a 10-foot wall that circled the campus. To my right, across the road, was a very large, dark field that stretched for miles, with no nearby houses. The only option I had left was back the way I had come, but that primal fear told me not to turn my back on the car under any circumstances. I took a very quick glance out of the corner of my eye to check that the way behind me was clear, and I slowly started walking backwards, so I was going back in the direction I had come from but was still facing the car. After what seemed like hours but was actually just a few minutes, the car started up and sped off into the distance, thankfully not reappearing again. I started walking forwards again and made it back to my flat. I locked myself in and didn't tell anyone about what happened for a very long time. Looking back, I see that as soon as I realized something shady was going on, I should maybe have rung the police or campus security. But at the time, as I was in fight or flight mode, I wanted to be able to focus all my senses on the situation around me rather than being distracted by a phone. On the surface of it, the car didn't look particularly shady. It was just a normal hatchback by a fairly popular car manufacturer. The naive part of me wants to think that the person was stopping to check their phone or a map, thought I was someone they knew, or was just trying to pull a prank. But who stops to check a map on a deserted out-of-town road at 1 a.m.? And if it was someone with genuine intentions, why would they not try and talk to me or get out the car to identify themselves? My gut instinct was telling me something was seriously off, and I dread to think what would have happened if I hadn't listened to it. The only thing that makes me feel slightly better is that literally a minute after the shady car left, a police car came down the road in the opposite direction. If I could go back and do things differently, I would have flagged them down and told them what happened. I guess part of the reason I didn't tell anyone for so long was I thought people would judge or blame me for not realizing how much danger I was putting myself in, walking alone along a secluded road in the early hours of the morning. After this, I became a lot more savvy about how I would get home from places late at night. I started studying in my bedroom more, and on the odd occasion I had a late-night library session. I discovered campus security could drive me back to my residence. I got the impression they thought I was being a bit of a drama queen every time I asked, but I'm sure had they known what happened that night they would understand.